realise how much I missed the corporate worship. I just love having the communion prayers, the corporate prayers of the church, the singing together. Zoom was great. Thank you for organising that, Ian. But it didn't quite do that for me. So it's lovely to be back here again, worshipping together. So while we see that Psalm 23 could have been interpreted corporately, I like to see it as a personal psalm, guiding me individually. Verse 1 begins, "The Lord is my shepherd." What thoughts did you have when you heard Bethany reading that psalm? You might like to tell me about it later. In the context of the Old Testament, God is seen as distant, the lawgiver, the one who created, the one who might be angry perhaps when they do the wrong thing. But I like to imagine that this psalmist, this writer, might have been remembering his times out in the sheep when he was looking up at the stars. He might have been in worship, remembering this. And he has this aha moment. Like a good shepherd out in the fields, God is my shepherd. He knows me by name, and he will care for me. That word my, as Rex told us, is not a whole word in Hebrew, but it's like a suffix or an ending that's added to the word shepherd. And it's a very important suffix because it's saying, really, I personally will know no evil because I have a shepherd caring for me. He's protecting me. He will give me peace of mind, and I can trust fully in God. So to say the Lord is my shepherd also means I shall not want. It doesn't mean that I'll have everything that I want. It does mean I will have everything that I need. I will not lack anything that I really need. And so that it gives us the picture of the shepherd totally caring for his sheep, and it's affirming God's goodness to us and his grace. So there are times when we do need to be reminded of the vastness of God, but also the closeness of God. And be reminded, God is my shepherd, and he's your shepherd too. So let's look at verse 2. In his imagination, the writer's going back maybe to the sunny days in the pastures, and he knows that God is guiding him. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. The ancient shepherd needed to guide his flock to pastures where there was some good green grass, because in the Far East End countries you probably recall that it's very dusty and dry, so he has to know where the green pastures are. And he too would have known that the sheep refuse to sit down, lie down, relax when they're hungry, when they're restless, when they're nervous or fearful. The flies and parasites can annoy them. A hungry sheep is forever on its feet, rumbling around looking for grass. So shepherds would look for the grass, and when their sheep were free from tension and were well fed, then they could relax and lie down. So the writer's thoughts are turning to God, whose calming presence has helped them. He's guided them. He's given them their physical needs. Like sheep, we can often be disturbed and frightened. We live in a very uncertain world, and anything can happen at any time. Last year, when I had times of fear and worry, I would rely on the promise in Isaiah 43. Do not be afraid, for I am with you. And also the verse in Timothy 1. God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. These promises, I think, are also needed for us here and pertinent to our situation. God provides us not only with our basic needs, but also with spiritual food. Like a good shepherd, God knows what's good for us. He makes us lie down in green pastures. He also leads beside still waters. I learnt that sheep won't drink from turbulent water. Did you know that? And so the shepherd often has to dam up a place. They might drink from a slow-flowing stream, but not something that's turbulent. So the shepherd has to look for a good place, but not a place that's like a mud puddle where they'll pick up parasites. Now, we can be a bit like that. God's promised so much for us, and yet we often drink from places that are not good for us. Jesus made it clear that our thirsty souls can only be satisfied fully when we come to him. And in John 7, we are told that Jesus said, "If any man thirsts, let him come to me and drink." Jesus, my shepherd, leads me beside still waters. Why? Because he has my needs in his interest. He has my best interest in his heart. And he restores my soul. Verse 3, he leads me in the right paths, or as some translations say, the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. For his name, his reputation, he wants us to trust him. He wants us to know he will do what he promised. How many times during last year did you feel jaded, weary, depressed, lacking energy, wondering if you have the strength to go on? In that context, read, he restores my soul. Soul just really meant your inner being, your inner life. And restoring is not just that shot of coffee first thing in the morning. This is the inner sufficiency to keep going. If you've lost confidence or vision or a sense of worth, remember, God can restore you. The psalmist, when he was writing, was fully aware of what God had done with this nation of Israel. So many times they had lost their way, they had wandered off, they had been rebellious. But God kept on restoring them. I cannot imagine the patience that God had with his people. So many times they failed. And yet the psalmist says, he restores my soul. How does he restore? Well, the shepherd restored the sheep through rest and water and food. For us, it might be through the encouragement of other people. It might be through the encouragement of a small group or a life group. And we hope to be starting those soon. We hope that you'll be in a life group. We hope maybe that you'll lead or host a life group. So we'll be talking to some of you later. If you are interested in leading or being part of a small group, you can see Ted or myself later. We might always also be restored through words of scripture or songs. Some songs can really uplift our heart. Sometimes it's just that still small voice when we stop long enough to meditate and pray. And we hear the voice of God saying, "You are my child. All will be well." So sometimes rest and a holiday can restore our physical strength, but we need God to restore us spiritually. So there may be some here still struggling, going through a sense of unease. Be assured that God can restore you to new vision, new confidence. As your strength is restored, so you will become the person God intends you to be. Also, if we turn to God and seek his forgiveness, we can experience his renewing power. God longs to restore us and lead us in the right paths. Isaiah described our rebelliousness a little bit like this. All of us like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned his own way, but the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. That's from Isaiah 53. So as we submit to the shepherd, he'll lead us in the right direction. Allow him to restore to you the joy of his peace. Why not pray with me that prayer in Psalm 51? Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation, and grant me a willing spirit to sustain me. Then, as Rex said in verse 4, we know God to be a God of comfort. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and staff, they comfort me. So we see the first 3 verses as the sheep and the shepherd are in the sunshine. But we come to verse 4 and we're in darkness, the gloom. Sometimes we do have trying seasons of life. And the shepherd has to lead his flock through dark ravines, which were good places for robbers and animals that might attack the sheep. So the shepherd has things to help him. He has a rod, which he could beat off the attackers. He's got a staff, which he could pick up the sheep that fall over. Now, I mentioned before that the author also seems to have a childlike trust in God, but his serenity is not childlike. It's being built up because he's got this experience of having God with him through the danger and the strife that he's been through. He has this deep sense of trust that has developed. Even in tough times, God had not abandoned him. He delivered him from fear and loneliness. He'd been his guide, his refuge, his comfort on his long journeys. In our tougher experiences, we find that family and friends can help, but they can't always be there. They can't always give us the help we want. And that reminds me of the feeling that I had during a major operation, waiting outside the room on a trolley, no one else there. Ted had to go, waiting to go into the operating theatre. It was then that I said my scripture verses and I sang my songs, and I knew I had no need to fear because my shepherd was there with me. So the darkest valley sometimes can be translated as the valley of gloom, the valley of the shadow of death. Whether it's speaking of gloom, a dark place, or even death, places of suffering, we know that God, our shepherd, is there. The psalmist doesn't say that he's exempt from all these experiences, but rather that God is with him there in those places. For some of us, those places might be discomfort for us, but we know that nothing will separate us from the love of God.